What's up, Kings of War fans? Utterly Spineless here, bringing you another Kings of War battle report, and we have on the table today 2,250 points of glorious Ratkin. Talk us through your list, Nick. What have you got?
Alright, starting over here, we've got a horde of spear warriors with Dwarven Ale.
Okay.
3 weapons teams, all with piercing.
Okay, yeah, so we're playing the 2,250, so you can take the 3 spam.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah.
Horde of Blight, they've got the Brewer Strength.
I like these guys. They always turn up quite well for you, don't they?
Yeah, I really like them. I really like the Ensnare, and the Stealthy is super handy as well. Right, 2 Death Engines, both with the Sorcery upgrade.
Yay, 2. Yay, can't wait.
Right, that's a Shredder. I think they're pants, but I'm going to give it another go. It's been about 18 months since I used one, so we'll see how it does.
Okay.
Then Horde of Shock Troops, they've got the Brew of Courage. Alright.
Nice.
Then 3 Vermintides.
3 little rat darts. Big fan of these chaps. Speed 6 nimble. I think they're good.
They're superb.
Yep.
Vicious! And then Hack Paws. They've got the Staying Stone.
Okay. So what's their nerf?
So they are 14-15, which I think is pretty good for some light cav.
Yep.
Then Rude Boy at the back is the Demon Spawn.
Nice. Big fan.
He doesn't have wings.
Nope.
Just as is. This guy is a Warlock. He's got the Drain Life spell and Inspiring. And then...
And he comes with Lightning Bolt 5.
He comes with Lightning Bolt 5.
Okay.
And then last guy is a Swarm Cry. He's got Leap of Unsatiable Darkness.
Nice.
And that is 2250.
So you've got a lot to shoot in here, because you've got the 3 weapons teams, you've got the Lightning Bolt from those 2 guys at the back, and then obviously you got your, these guys that are legit, aren't they?
Invariably hits on 4s though, so it's entirely up to the dice.
So tons of shooting, looking forward to it. So that makes up 2,250 points of Ratkin. And playing against the Ratkin, we have 2,250 points of Orcs. Now this is my new Orc army I've been working on for the last few months. It was kind of like a work in progress. So let's start from the left. What have I got? Well, 2 regiments of Moraxes. One of them has Brew of Haste, so let's say the black one, to make it speed 6. Then behind them we have a Crudger mounted on a Gore Chariot. This guy has the +1 attack from the Stabby Sneak, and he has Blade of Slashing, so he should kick off a little bit of damage. Then we have 2 Gore Rider regiments. One of them has Caterpillar, so let's say the painted one has Caterpillar. Then we have a horde of... Now, normally these are axes, but today they are the long axes, which are the Clash of Kings 2018 ones, so they have phalanx. So basically in the normal orcs they have extra attacks and they have phalanx. These also have Brew of Strength, so they're crushing 2. Then we have a horde of Orclings, big fan of these guys, 90 points and you get 25 attacks with Vicious. Then we have a horde of Trolls with Dwarven Ale for Headstrong. And then character-wise, towards the back, we have the one and only Gakamak. Obviously, that guy is legit. Then this guy is a... I was going to say flagger then, not a flagger. Yeah, a flagger, folks, isn't it? Yeah, flagger. A flagger mounted on a Gore with Diadem of Dragonkind. So he's got Breath Attack 10 and Inspiring, but that's literally about it. Then we have 2 War Drums. And then we have a Crusher with Stabby Sneak for extra attack and Wings of the Honey Maze.
The Crudger, Joe. Crudger.
Crudger? Yeah, Crudger.
Crudger. Crushers are different thing.
Oh yeah, the Crushers aren't as good, are they? Right, so there we go. That makes up 2,250 points of Orcs. And we've already rolled for deployment. We're playing push, aren't we?
Yes.
Scenario 3 push, but we don't know who's going first yet. There we go. So what's up, Kings of War fans? Bringing you another battle report, and pumped to have my Orcs on the channel for the first time. As I said, brand new army for me, and I've only been playing them a couple of months. I'm getting them painted as I go, and I've only got a handful of games under my belt at the moment, but I'm doing pretty well with them, and I really like the Orc playstyle actually. Just lots of big chunky units. You get them up the board and then you smash face, and it's always good fun. For those of you who care, the set deployment went down. Obviously the Ratkin outdropping the Orcs here, and because I got to choose side and go first, he had a couple of things to put down after me as well. So this is what the board is looking like before we start then, and for my deployment I kind of I wanted to get up the board quickly, so I basically deployed in a center block with leaving a gap because I wanted to avoid that woods. that was my only train of thought there. I put the Gore Riders in that terrain because they have Pathfinder, they won't be hindered by that, and I put the Moraxes behind that obstacle, so at least one of my units of Moraxes has cover. I split my War Drums between the 2 packs, and then both of them have Inspiring, and I thought I'd use this open space to get up the board and then use that open space to get up the board. That was what I was thinking. It's a little bit risky because I'm not making the most of my cover. Could have used that building there, could have used this to more effect there for cover, but you know, whatever. I was hoping I'd get first turn, to be honest. Right, so as I mentioned, we're playing the push scenario, and we rolled a d3 and we got a 6. So we have 3 loot tokens each. Now I placed one on the one on the trolls there, one on my horde there, and one on the Moraxes here. So there, and there. One goes in the middle, and then the Ratkin placed 2 on his ensnare horde there, and then he placed 1 in the corner. So yeah, that was quite an interesting choice, really. And we both had to look this up because we weren't entirely sure that a unit could hold 2 loot counters, but everything it says in the book, it doesn't say you can't, and every time it mentions loot counters, it mentions plural. In other words, they think a unit can hold 2, so we just played like you can hold 2. Interesting that that's never come up before. Obviously, tons of shooting. I'm going to get shot to hell, so whatever, just embrace it and get up the board. And that is what it's looking like from the Ratkin side. So there's his horde there with the 2 loot tokens. Interesting one here. I definitely thought that his more packs would go on his other flank. He put those down last. So if I go back to my deployment, I put my individual there because I thought they were going to go there, and he switched them and put them on that flank instead. So that was the only real thing that surprised me out of deployment there. And we roll for first turn, and I don't get it, unfortunately. Would have loved it, but don't get it. But there we go. Let's get on with the game. Ratkin first turn then, and it's a really good start. I actually forgot to take photos of their movement phase, but into their shooting phase, he opened up and put 3 wounds onto the Gore Riders. So interesting choice of targets. I assumed he would go for the Moraxes, but he didn't. He went for the Gore Riders despite them having a higher defense. But I guess they're just faster and more of a threat early on. So that is Lightning Bolt 5 from this guy there, and then I think maybe a shot landed from that shredder, I can't remember, but both of these death engines, one of them's moved and one stayed behind the obstacle. Now I thought these guys were range 24, but they're not. They're range 18, which means they definitely can't shoot on the first turn because they've only got a speed 6. So 6 and 18 is 24, and seeing as both sides have to be more than 24 inches on the first turn, they shouldn't have been able to shoot. I can't remember whether that one did or not. I'm not sure how we played that. The game was a few days ago. So anyway, shooting, that's what happened on the Gore Riders, and then with the shooting on the other flank, the Lightning Bolt 5 from his Vermin Lord, and just 1 wound goes on to my character. Obviously shooting the individual, he gets -1, I think. So yeah, some interesting choice of targets there, didn't expect that. Obviously none of his weapons teams can shoot, but that is the end of Ratkin turn 1. Orc turn 1 then, and this is what the board is looking like at the end of the Orc movement. But first, let's get a better sense of the Ratkin movement that I forgot last turn. So he moved up quite aggressively on the left-hand side and using that nice pivot there on the hack paws to try and get off some flank charges, and everything just kind of moving up in general. So onto the Orcs then, though. The left-hand side has gone up. I've been careful to leave those Gore Riders in that difficult terrain, so more than half of the base is in that difficult, so they should get cover if they get shot at. This individual here, I only put him on that left flank to stop any shenanigans on the flanks, but as soon as he's put quite a slow-moving horde there, I figured I'd just pop him back into the centre to give me a little bit more options so I can go more this way if I want. So that's what I did with him. On the right-hand side, not a great story. I'm hindered by that obstacle with the Moraxes. I deployed them there to get cover, but you know, really it's probably not worth it because it just slows my advance down so much. And same with this this chariot here. I can't move it up as fast as I'd want because obviously the exposing the flank there. And Gakamak, he was about here, was he? And he goes up there just behind the building to try and get some shenanigans in next turn. But movement-wise, that's as much as I can do. On to shooting then, and I do get some breath attacks from my flagger with Diadem, and unfortunately I only get 1 wound on his weapons team and do absolutely nothing to it and don't even waver. which is unfortunate because he'd actually left out of inspiring range as well. So I could have got a little bit lucky then. If I'd done 2 or 3 wounds, I could have popped it, maybe even wavered it. But no, unfortunately, the dice went on my side, so I don't get anything. And that is the end of Orc turn 1. Overview of the board at the end of the Ratkin turn 2 movement, and on the left hand side of the board everything's pressed up, no charges were declared because nothing's in range, but all 3 of those weapons teams are now in range and will have some targets, and so will a Vermin Lord with his lightning bolt. Stay just out of range in the woods in the middle, and on the right hand side everything is pressed up pretty high, so that Vermintide little rat dart there has parked itself in front of everything. That's not actually a charge. The hack paws have charged into the front of the Crudger, and that other Vermintide regiment hasn't charged, it's actually just put itself there with its nimble move. I think his plan there is to just block off Gakamak. But both of his weapon death engines, that one behind the obstacle has moved, so he's shooting on a negative, but that one hasn't. So there we go, that's all the charges, and that's the movement. If we go on to shooting, I get super lucky here because he unloads all of his weapons teams onto the Gore Riders and only does 3 wounds. Now that is a weapons team there, there and there, so that's breath attack 30 with piercing 1. I think the cover just saved me here because, you know, he was hitting on 5s because of the difficult terrain they're in. And obviously only piercing 1, so he's winning on 4, so he needed some hard dice, but he had 30 shots and then lightning bolt 5. So well below average on the shooting there. He probably should have put them up to at least 7 or 8, I would have thought. Yeah, so I get lucky. I get very lucky there, no question about it. Not so lucky on the right-hand flank, though, because he opens up with the shots from that guy, and that guy, and then they put 12 wounds on the Gore Riders, literally just obliterate them, and they are routed despite having Rallying 2 and Inspiring. So that is what they're capable of if he gets the dice. The hack paws do utter garbage, though, and only put 3 wounds on the Crudger. That's pretty poor, because they got Thunderous and they weren't hindered, and I think they got 16 attacks, so 3 wounds there. So combat-wise, nothing, but some pretty good shooting from the Ratkin, and that is the end of the Ratkin turn 2. So, Orc response in turn 2, and this is the right hand side of the board, and I'm suffering a little bit from crowd crush here, which is a problem I have had with the Orcs. It's just that larger base makes things a little bit more awkward, so I'm taking the best options here, well, I think anyway. So the Moraxes have gone into the flank of that rat dart, and because this point is putting Gakamak into the front there, I elected to put him around the side. Again, there was not much options for him. And then the Crudger on the chariot have gone into the hack paws. Ideally, I would have wanted the Moraxes into the hack paws and Gakamak into the Vermintide, but I just couldn't make it work. The base sizes were too big. So the Moraxes have gone into that rat chaff there, and the War Drum has gone in as well, because why not? It was there anyway, so I may as well make the charge. That's very orky. And then on the left-hand side, I've done these charges. So the Gore Riders have gone into the Horde. The Orklings and the Trolls have gone into that rat chaff because the Trolls were hindered. And I thought, oh, balls to it, I'll put the Orcs in anyway, the Orklings in anyway, may as well. The Horde has gone up and just stayed behind, and I've moved my flagger in front of the Horde to try and get some breath attacks onto that weapons team there and get it off the board. My little individual with Honey Maze, he's gone into that weapons team there, because I didn't see the point in putting him into that Horde because I don't think it would have made a huge difference, and I thought if I put him into that weapons team, at least if he gets countercharged the next turn, it is going to be hindered because he's in the woods at least. So that's what all the charges have done. Shooting wise, doesn't go as well as I planned because I don't put a single wound on that weapons team with that breath attack 10 there, despite having no cover or anything like that. So that absolutely sucks. The one thing I put this guy in my team for was to do specifically this thing, going picking off weapons teams and little individuals and putting some wounds and giving me some range threat, but it's just not working out. So yeah, 1 wound from 2 turns of shooting attacks is not great. Onto the combats though, I do enough wounds and I do manage to rout that little rat pack. I think we just rolled for the Trolls there and we put 8 on them, so that was already like double ones territory anyway. And they are routed. The Gore Riders do quite well and they put 9 wounds on this rat horde, but obviously it's a horde with tons of nerve and this guy kicking off rallying 2, so it's never going to be enough, so they bounce back. That's the nerve roll for those guys, they are routed. The other rat chaff on the right hand side is routed as well. Again, just massive overkill from the Moraxes despite being hindered. And I make a little bit of an error here. I elect to go forwards after the combat because I want to get off that obstacle here. Because because I'm thinking if I make a charge next turn, I'm going to be hindered. So I roll to go forward, and I roll a 6, which is like way more than I wanted. I was hoping to get something like a 2 or a 3, just get off the obstacle, but 6 puts me way up there and a little bit exposed, and the same with the war drum as well. I got a 5 with the war drum, so those guys have gone charging ahead. Combat-wise then, the Moraxes obviously destroy that rat chaff. But the Crudger on the chariot only does 3 wounds to the hack paws, and he just bounces back, so not a great combat there. The individual routes the weapons team and makes a reform, and that is what the board is looking like at the end of Orc turn 2. So on to Ratkin turn 3, and this is the board after the movement phase. If we start on the right hand side, the hack paws have gone into the Moraxes, and his horde of spear warriors have managed to get a flank charge on the war drum, so I'm paying the price for overextending there. And in the centre, his horde of blight have gone, they've elected to charge into the front of my Crudger. This is a little risky. I've made a mistake here, obviously leaving an individual in front of my units for that overrun potential, but in all honesty, I didn't think he'd do it. He's playing quite defensive with his blight so far, and really like holding them back for those loot tokens. So yeah, just didn't expect that charge. So, oh sorry, excuse me again. So he's charged his blight into my Crudger, sorry, my flagger, and he's Bane chanted them as well. And then on the left hand side, the shock troops have gone into the front of the Gore Riders, and his demon spawn have gone into my my Crudger, and then he's just moved his weapons teams around to get some shooting off. So yeah, onto the shooting. Both his death engines have unloaded onto the Moraxes, and his little character with like 5 there, and his Shredder war engine. And I get a bit lucky here because, to be honest, they're not in cover. The only thing they get cover from is that Shredder, and between all of those, I only take 8 wounds. And then the rallying from the war drum and the inspiring just saves me. That could have been a lot worse. They could have easily been routed because they're not in cover there. And those death engines, they've got piercing 2, I think, aren't they? Yeah, they're piercing 2, so he's winning on 2s with those as well. That could have been a lot worse, to be honest. So I get a little bit lucky there. His dice not going too well on the shooting. But it does go better on the left-hand side. So this is what the weapons teams do to the Horde of Orclings. Just between 2 of them, they put 6 wounds on that Horde of Orclings and then waver them. Now this is frustrating because I have my rallying 2 for my war drums, so the nerve on those Orclings is like 15, 17 I think, so we needed a 9 to waver, and he gets it. Really, really annoying. Then onto the combat. So the shock troops rout the Horde of Core Riders in a 1-er. I'm not really surprised there. I really like these shock troops infantry. They've got elite and they've got vicious. Sometimes he feels them with Brew Sharpness, so they're hitting on 3s with that elite and vicious. So I've played games against these guys before, and I know they can kick out serious damage. So those Gore Riders were wounded going in. I'm not really surprised they've been insta-routed there. So they're gone. Totally different story from the demon spawn though, because he is hindered. So he's got 13 attacks in on force, and I think he rolled like 12 misses and 1 hit, something like that. It was so bad. He did 1 wound onto the Crusher, sorry. No, he is a Crusher. And yeah, anyway, bounces back. So he has a total shocker, that guy does. The Horde of Blight though, obviously they rout my flagger and then go into the front of my long axes, and they're Bane trying to do quite well. I think they put 8 wounds on my long axes. But obviously it's not enough to break the long axes, and they bounce back. His Horde of Spear Warriors, again, flank charge, so no surprises there, but 10 wounds on the war drum and rout it. But to be honest, it's done its job so far because it's managed to hold up my guys for 3 shooting phases, so they've done alright. And the hack paws do total garbage. The hack paws put not a single wound on the Moraxes. They have lost their Thunderous, but still 16 attacks, 4s and 4s, and not a single wound. So really bad combats here from the Ratkin for most of the part, apart from the shock troops. And that is the end of Ratkin turn 3. That is the overview of the board after all their reforms, etc. So on to Orc turn 3. So Orc turn 3 then, and this is what the board is looking like before I make all my charges, etc. But let me just draw your attention to this combat in the middle. So after this Horde of Blight have bounced back from my Horde of Long Axes, You can see the trolls, the way they're facing that. It is really, really close as to whether they have line of sight for this. If I just flick forward and show you. Yeah, that is the arc of sight we put down, and as you can see, it's so close, and basically because they charged the individual and then overran, it was, you're never really sure if you're positioning these units like absolutely perfectly. They could have been in, they could have been out. It was absolutely 50-50. So what we decided to do is, despite the arc of light showing that they do have line of sight, we said, okay, we'll just dice off for it. On a 4+, they have line of sight. And I got a 4+, so we agreed that they would have line of sight. And obviously that's a really big deal for this game, because this unit has ensnare. So a flank charge means they don't get their ensnare, and they're carrying 2 loot tokens. So they can't take that charge from the trolls on the chin. They were almost certainly routed if that charge was a goer. So as you can tell, it's really important. So it's worth pointing out that this was like that close, and it was just a case of a dice off that went in my favour. So rest of the charges then for the game. Oh, sorry, on the right hand side, the Moraxes go into the Horde, and so does Gakamak. They put something like 15 wounds on this Horde, and he'd made a mistake, actually. He left these out of inspiring range, so the way he reformed them after the War Drum charge meant that they were like, they were like 7 inches away from his inspiring, something like that. But I routed them anyway. The regiment of Hackpaws, they were routed as well. Moraxes, and then the flank charge from the Crudgers, no way they can take that, so they were routed. The Horde of Blight in the middle, I think the Long Axes did the 9 wounds and the Trolls did 20. That's not a hindered charge there from those Trolls. So those guys were routed. And then on the left-hand side, my Crudger with Wings of Honey Maze, he's the only one who doesn't actually have a decent show in this turn. He puts 8 wounds on this weapons team, and that puts them up to 9 because they had 1 wound on them already, and they get rallying 2 from this guy, so they go up to 8. They are 8-10. They go up to 10-12. Yeah, hold on. I'm not sure how that could have happened. I couldn't have rolled double ones because then they wouldn't have been wavered. So if I rolled a 3 to waver them, that would have put them on 12, and they should have been routed, right? I'm not sure. Yeah. So anyway, I've failed the nerve roll. Then we agreed that they were wavered. I'm not sure how that could work now in hindsight. We must have made a mistake there, I think. But anyway, this team was wavered, so that really sucked. That was the only thing I didn't get that turn. And that is the end. That is what the board is looking like at the end of the Orcs turn 3. So a really good show in there from the Orcs when I was able to get my charges off. I got loads of multi-charges off and routed a lot of rats. A whole Horde in the middle, a whole Horde on the right-hand flank, and the Hackpaws. Good show in from the Orcs. So Ratkin turn 4, and on the right hand side, the Death Engine is charged into the front of the Moraxes. I'm a big fan of these Death Engines, actually, because they actually have Crushing 1 and Speed 6, so they can get a lot of really good shooting off, and then when you do come into range, they can charge out and still do a little bit of damage, which is exactly what's happened here. Big fan of these units, very versatile. So they've gone into the front of the heavily wounded Moraxes, and he elects to put all his shooting onto the Crudger on the Chariot, who was already sitting on 3 wounds, and he gets him up to 9 and wavers him. Now that is the shooting from the other Death Engine, and the Shredder, and the Lightning Bolt 5 from this individual here. So, yeah, that's frustrated. He's got Fury, but obviously Fury doesn't mean anything against shooting attacks, so that guy's wavered, so that really holds me up next turn, and that's annoying. I especially thought he would have shot the Moraxes as well, because they're holding a loot token and they're lower defense. They're only defense 4 instead of defense 5, so I really just assumed he would shoot the Moraxes. So, yeah, but anyway, unusual choice of targets, but he is wavered, so I guess it turned out well. And then the shooting on the left-hand side, he puts only one of his weapon teams, because the other one is wavered, onto the War Drum and puts 5 wounds on it and routs it, despite it being inspired. So that was pretty good shooting there from the Rats. Combat-wise, then he gets the flank charge on the Horde of Orclings. Again, they were wavered, so I couldn't really do much about their positioning. I could have pivoted them, but to be honest, whether these guys take a flank charge or a front charge from those shock troops is kind of immaterial. They're getting routed anyway. That was my thinking anyway. So those guys are gone. And then the demon spawn, he does crap again. My Crudger of the Honey Maze was on 2 wounds. So he did much better this time. He did 6 wounds, but he still only managed to waver him. So that is a really terrible combat from him. He's not had a good game, in fairness, that guy. So, oh yeah, on the combat on the right hand side, They were on 8 wounds, right? The Moraxes. So that Death Engine's done up to 8. I think it got Bane Chanted. I think that's why it's done so good. It was Bane Chanted, so it was actually wounding on 2s. Puts them up to 16, and obviously that's double 1 territory, and they are routed. So that is what the board is looking like after Ratkin turn 4, after their reforms. So he's done quite well to route the Moraxes and waver that one, and then waver that guy. He's got Fury, my Crudge Wings of the Honey Maze, so he can only countercharge, but it does mean he's tied him up for another turn, and then he's routed the Horde of Auckland, so really good turn 4 there by the Ratkin. So Orc turn 4, and this is what I decide to do. Here's the board before I make my movement phase, and here is it after. So obviously this guy is wavered there, so I couldn't really do much. He stay there. Gakamak goes into the front of that Death Engine, and my Moraxes, they weren't in charge range, so I moved them up and then pivot them. With my Horde of Long Axes, I could have reformed them facing the left-hand side of the board and started to look at attacking these units here, but again, it's the scenario. They were holding the 2 loot tokens, so I'm thinking to myself, he's still got that weapons team on the board and the weapons team, and he's got Lightning Bolt 5 from his Demon Spawn. So I wanted to keep them safe, so I elected not to reform them to the left, but to keep them in the middle of the board and in those woods where they've got cover and they can be relatively safe. Whether that was the right thing to do or not, I don't know. So the Trolls go into the front of his shock troops, because I'm thinking to myself, that's a non-hindered charge, and those shock troops are already on 9 wounds. If I can get some really decent rolling, I can put them on like 20 plus wounds, and then I can potentially eliminate one of his hordes and another one of his scoring units, and then he's got like 1 scoring unit on the board. That's what I was thinking, but in reality, they get rallying 2 from that guy, and he's got Helm of Confidence, so you know, he's got a lot of nerve, so I needed some seriously good rolling on there. So anyway, that's where the charges are. My Crudge has gone back into the Demon Spawn. He had Fury, so his hands were tied. He could only make a counter charge, and he puts him up to 4 wounds, which is rubbish. And I don't do that well with the Trolls. I actually only do 5 wounds, which is absolute crap. That's not even hindered, and then I get a double 1 as well. So yeah, that sucks. Don't forget those Trolls are actually carrying a token as well, so that might have been a mistake on my part. Gakamak does 7 wounds onto that Death Engine. 7 wounds from 7 attacks. That is Gakamak in a nutshell. He is legit, but he doesn't break it. He doesn't even waver it. He's totally fine. And then, yeah, so that is the board at the end of Orcs turn 4. So a really bad turn there. Some not great charges and not great dice. And I get absolutely nothing. They don't route or waver a single unit during my turn. So there we go. That's Orc turn 4. So Ratkin turn 5, and this is the board after they've made their movements, and this is what he elects to do. On the left-hand side, the shock troops have gone back into that horde of trolls, and his demon spawn have actually flank charged the horde of trolls. So he's elected not to charge into the front of that Kudra and kill him, but leave that to the weapons team that are just there. He is on something like 8 wounds as well, don't forget. The other weapons team has made its way across to try and get some shots onto that horde. Although I can't remember whether they're in range to see what the photos say. The first Death Engine has gone back into Gakamak. The other Death Engine and the Shredder and the Lightning Bolt have elected to do some shooting. So I think what happened here is he elects to start with a Shredder, and he just rolled really good dice here and managed to get the hits and then the wounds to get the 3 wounds onto the Crudger on the Gore Chariot, puts him up to 12, and then he routed him, basically puts him up to 12 and routes him. So yeah, that's really frustrating. And then with the rest of the shooting, he can then put that Death Engine and that Lightning Bolt 5 into the Moraxes, and then he does 7 wounds onto those Moraxes and wavers them. He just moved his character across in the front there to try and like chaff block them up with an individual. But 7 wounds and they're wavered. So some really good Skaven shooting there on the right hand side, and then more really good Ratkin shooting here. That weapons team puts 2 wounds onto my my guy, and then he gets his 4 and then routs that guy. So yeah, sucks. And then, needless to say, this flank charge from the demon spawn, as well as the front charge from the shock troops. Those trolls ain't going anywhere, and they are routed. So that, I think, is the... Oh no, sorry. And then 3 wounds went on to Gakamak from the death engine. And then... Ooh, I'm getting ahead of myself. That is the end of the Ratkin turn. So they've wavered the Moraxes. They've routed the Horde of Trolls with the loot token. And then they've routed the Crudger on the chart as well. So some awesome good shooting from the Ratkin. And some decent combats as well. And they are right back in the game. I think they're in a very commanding position here. And that is the end of Ratkin turn 5. Orc turn 5, and this is the board after I've made my charges. To be honest, I've only got 3 things left on the board, and one of them is wavered, so I don't have a lot of stuff to do in my turn 5. It's nice and simple. My long axes charge into the death engine. They were actually in its rear arc, so when we measured out, because the unit leader point was like way over here, so it looks funny, but that's the way it worked out. Gakamak has gone into the front of the other death engine. My Moraxes are wavered, so can't do anything with those. Oh yeah, and it's worth pointing out as well that I forgot to mention the shooting attacks from that weapons team last turn. So they managed to do 3 wounds onto the long axes, so they've gone up to 11 wounds. So they're pretty heavily wounded at the moment. Combats wise, then obviously the long axes routed that death engine, and then Gakamak for the 3rd turn in a row put 7 wounds from 7 attacks onto the death engine, but unfortunately doesn't manage to route it or anything like that, or even waver it. I don't think. It definitely won't be shooting next turn though, so that's okay. And yeah, that is the board at the end of my turn. So, oh yeah, I've got 1 heavily wounded Horde and heavily wounded regiment on the board, and then Gakamak, so Orcs are really under the cosh here. But if we recap on the objective game, because it's the end of turn 5, I've actually managed to I've got 3 loot tokens on my Horde, and I've got 1 on my regiment. The Horde started with 1, don't forget, then they got 1 from killing the Blight, and then they picked up the 1 in the middle of the board and then moved over to here. So I'm actually scoring 8 points from those 4 loot tokens, whereas Ratkin have got 1 loot token on their Horde, which they got from the trolls, and it's not wholly in my half either, so the Ratkins have only got 1 point. The other 2 tokens are right there close to the middle, which the trolls dropped before making the charge, and then 1 there way in the corner of the board. So yes, Orcs are getting shot to hell and back in this game, but we are winning the objective game at the moment, so let's see if they can hold on for dear life. Oh, it is also worth pointing out as well that we measured it, and this Ratkin this weapons team here was about 6.5 inches away from getting into those woods, so they won't be able to get line of sight next turn. So that's at least one thing that won't be shooting at my Horde next turn. So this is the board after the Ratkin movement phase, and the Horde of Shock Troops have moved up as far as they can, and they've picked up that loot token. But that is unfortunately all they can do. The 2 weapons teams aren't in range to shoot at me because they've only got Breath Weapon 12, but the Demon Spawn that's as far as he could move because he was in the woods, and this guy with Lightning Bolt 5 has also got shooting and that Shredder as well. So with all the shooting, luckily he puts 1 wound on my Horde of long axes. Basically, the Shredder missed everything, and then the Demon Spawn had cover, so he was hitting on 5s and missed like nothing. And then this guy, I think, hit like 4, but then was wounding on 4s and got like hardly anything. So between all that Lightning Bolt 10 and the Shredder, he only does 1 wound. But he then rolls a 9 and wavers them. Oh, so that basically puts the nail in the coffin for me. I know that if this goes to turn 7, I've definitely lost because I can't move them out of harm's way. So that's so frustrating. And then again, this death engine goes back into Gakamak. He puts, I think he was on 3 wounds, so I think he did 4, and then rolls a 7 and wavers Gakamak again. So I now got 2 units on the board wavering. And then yeah, so that is the board at the end of Ratkin turn 6 with 2 of my units wavering and my Morax is stuck there getting chaffed up by the individual. So, some charges declared in Orc turn 6 then. My Moraxes, not sure what happened here. I think he just didn't place his individual close enough to me, and I was able to get that pivot off. It was close, but, we both looked at it, and it worked, so... Yeah, I think he just made a mistake then. He should have put him a little bit closer. So they get the charge into that shredder. Gakamak is wavered, but he has Fury, so we can go back into the Death Engine. And all I can do with my long axes is just make a reform move and have them facing in this direction. It's kind of, yeah, in case, and we get another turn 7. I don't know why I put them that way, but basically I'm just praying right now that we don't get a turn 7. And then combat-wise, obviously the Moraxes route that shredder. And Gakamak, I think it's the 4th turn in a row, does 7 wounds from 7 attacks. He is just that good, isn't he? I think he's the only unit in the game that hits on 2s. I think he is the only one. So 7 attacks hitting on 2s with Crushing 3 and Vicious. He is awesome. So 7 wounds. And he manages to route that Death Engine. And that is basically all I can do, and that is the end of my turn 6. So, like I said, currently I am scoring 8 points. But if we get a turn 7, that horde is almost definitely going to pop from shooting attacks, because both that weapons team there and that weapons team there will be able to get in range, and so will this guy with Lightning Bolt 5 from the Demon Spawn, and then Lightning Bolt 5 from this individual there. So, if that horde pops in the next turn, then it's a victory for the Ratkin. So we roll to see if we get a turn 7, and we don't. Yeah, we don't. I think I give the dice to my opponent because he was rolling bad dice all game, and he rolled like a 3. So we don't get a turn 7. So that is an Orc victory. 8 points, I think. 3, 4, 8 points against 2. From that guy, and I don't think he's wholly in my half, so I think it's 2 points for that. 8-2 to the Orcs. So there we go, guys, another Kings of War battle report. Hope you enjoyed that one, and a good victory there for the Orcs. For those of you who are interested, I put the tournament score up as well. It would have been 16-4 victory, but it is definitely worth noting that if that had gone to turn 7, it would have been more like a 17-3 victory for the Ratkin. So, yeah, I enjoyed that one. I knew I was going to get shot to hell and back, but it was just a case of if I could hold on till the end, and I did manage to. That is one thing I'm definitely struggling with Orcs. I played a Forces of the Abyss list a few weeks ago, and those freaks were just dancing around the board shooting me, and I really struggle to deal with units like that. Things like weapons teams and little characters with lightning bolts, and if you play against shooting, you can't really seem to get those individuals because you don't have anything to deal with it. You've got like almost 0 range capability. So I made this list specifically to try and combat that kind of stuff. So I had that Crudger with Wings of the Honey Maze, and then I had the Flagger with Diadem and Gakamak as well. But, the Ratkin just had so many drops. There was just too much stuff for me to deal with, and I didn't manage to effectively deal with those weapons teams. So I felt like I clutched victory from the jaws of defeat there. Come the latter turns of the game, I was getting wavered left, right, and centre, and I really struggled to even do anything. But I did manage to hold on. So there we go. MVP-wise, I think it's probably got to go to the Skaven shooting, which was really effective, but there wasn't one specific unit. It's just a multitude of everything all combined to just waver everything. But having said that, shock troops did do quite well. They managed to rout the regiment of Goraxes, and then rout the horde of Orclings, and then rout the horde of Trolls. And they were the only Ratkin unit to score victory points at the end of the game as well. So there we go. It's probably going to go to the shock troops. There we go. So I hope you enjoyed that one, and I'll catch you on the next one.